Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study through the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in Genesis chapter 11, and we're going to see some of the baggage that Abraham brought along. And if you remember in chapter 12, God calls Abraham away from his relatives. And yet Abraham brings Lot along. We're going to see some of the, I like to call it baggage, also problems we create when we go outside of what God's intended purpose is. And that's what Abraham does. Let me also say this, though, even though Abraham, we're going to get into the character of Lot. Lot was not like Abraham. Lot was really an ungodly person. We're going to see that. And one of the things God wanted to do was to separate Abraham from all of the ungodliness there. Not that Abraham was perfect, but he was a good man, and he was growing in his faith. And Lot was one of these that, okay, he's trouble from the standpoint that Abraham is always having to come to help him out. But we also see the character of Lot. The best way to describe it is that Lot was a fleshly, selfish, carnal person, while Lot was a godly person. And I'm using the term godly, not perfect, because yes, we just saw in the last chapter where Lot feared and Lot gave up his wife, Abraham feared and gave up his wife. Okay? But we're going to see the character. There's certain characters. Later on, we're going to see, like, for example, Esau. His character, the type of person he was like, he just, a person that you like, ugh, I don't even want to be around him. And Lot, you could tell, was a type of person. He benefited because of Abraham, but it was incredibly selfish. And that selfishness, that kind of self-centeredness, is what gets Lot in trouble. And the problem, of course, is that Abraham now has to sort of intervene. Okay? And so we're going to see that, Lot, the the baggage that God told him, the bad baggage that he has to bring along. All right, but let me also say this too, in fairness to Lot, that his father had died, and so Lot, Abraham sort of stepped in, and so in and of itself, it wasn't the worst thing. But when God called him, he did not really tell Abraham to bring any of his family. He was still with his grandfather, Abraham's father, and other uncle. But anyway, let's start. So verse 1 says, Then Abraham went up from Egypt to Negev, he, his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him. Abraham was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold. Now, you remember, he started off, he had great wealth, and then when he went to Egypt, he even added to that wealth even more. Verse 2, Abraham was very rich in livestock, silver, gold. He went up by stages to Negev, to Bethlehem, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had formerly been, to the site where he had built an altar. Now, one of the things I wanted to say, let me read this last sentence here. And Abraham called on the name of Yahweh there. One of the things I wanted to say is, what is kind of interesting, this the first time we see the altar being a practice. We don't find anywhere where an altar was commanded by God. They just knew, right? So at some point, maybe God told them. We're just not told in Scripture. The giving, the offering of sacrifices, we know goes all the way back to Cain and Abel. But we're not told anywhere in the sense of God saying, this is what I want. But here we see that Abraham and them knew, had some kind of knowledge that we're going to build this altar. And altars, which is that, they were little kind of like not tables, but these kind of I don't know what to call them, but they would offer stuff on them and offer them up to God. In some cases, there was fire and all of that. But he called on the name of Yahweh. And by the way, the term Yahweh is a Hebrew translation. Some people, you will see in some translations Jehovah, and in even some others Lord. Okay, God's name in and of itself is not that known here. I'll get into the name of God in a later verse. Verse 5 says, Now Lot, who was traveling with Abraham, also had flocks, herds, and tents. But the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together, for they had so many possessions that they could not stay together. And there was a quarrel between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At the time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites was living in the land. And Abraham said to Lot, Please, let's not have quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, since we are relatives. Now, as I said, remember that the only reason why Lot kind of has this is because the blessings of God is spilling over to him. So, but watch how this unfolds, though. Verse number 9. Isn't the whole land before you? Separate from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. Lot looked out and saw that the entire Jordan Valley, as far as Zoar, was well watered everywhere like the Lord's garden, and the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, kind of interesting. Kind of interesting here. I want to say a couple of thoughts here. I'm missing a verse here, but anyway, there's a couple of thoughts I want to kind of pick up here. One, you will notice that the land that's described here is kind of interesting. The garden, Egypt, Sodom and Gomorrah, was an extremely wealthy and prosperous and just good land. And that's even likened unto the Garden of Eden here. So you see, first, and watch how Lot reacts to this too. Now, again, I think in some cases too, Lot kind of shows us what sinful flesh, and then versus godliness. I think this is a good illustration here. Abraham says, hey, look, they were fighting over who would have what kind of land, right? And basically Lot said, hey, let's not fight, we're relatives. Notice Abraham says, whichever land you take. If you say, I'll take the left, I'll go to the right. If you say, I'll go to the right, I'll take the left. I want you to pay attention to how Lot reacts to this, though. And then as we move forward in the next several chapters, we're going to see this characteristic of Lot that always will bring him trouble. Okay? That will always bring him trouble. Okay, so verse 10, Lot looked out and saw the entire Jordan Valley as far as Zoar. We're going to see this city of Zoar later. He says, was well watered, everywhere like the Lord's garden, right? So immediately Moses uses this term, the Lord's garden. Then he says, in the land of Egypt. Now it's interesting here that he uses 3 different lands. Okay, now get this: the Garden of Eden. Now in this case, man was put out. Then he uses Egypt, and then he uses the Sodom and Gomorrah, and these were prime real estate. Notice that, but both, if you look at them today, they're not as well watered, and you see that these were both lands that will fall under God's judgment in various ways. Egypt, we'll see later on. Sodom and Gomorrah in just a few, coming up in the next book. I'm sorry, in a few chapters with Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm sorry. Okay. So, Lot looked out and saw the entire Jordan Valley as far as Zoar, and was well watered everywhere like the Lord's garden in the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose the entire Jordan Valley for himself, right? So right away, think about this now. What today seems like good decisions, not the best. Because then just from this perspective, a few short years, that land is going to be toast. Then Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. So, not good choices. And here's my point, too. Not good choices because of selfish reasons. Think about that. He's taking advantage of and not recognizing I'm blessed because of my uncle. But anyway, we're going to see more of Lot. I think Lot also represents a lot of Christians, some Christians I should say, that make bad choices based upon flesh, carnal flesh. But I do digress. Okay, verse 11 again. So Lot chose the entire Jordan Valley for himself. Then Lot journeyed eastward. Now remember that term eastward I said? How that term eastward always in the context here in this verse of scripture is not good. Think about this right here. So he's journeying eastward, and what? Where's the land that he's journeying from? Well, there's a whole bunch of wickedness going on. And we're going to see, of course we're going to see that. Watch, he's going to make the statement just now. Then Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, but Lot lived in the cities of the valley, meaning the valley of Jordan, and set up his tent. Now, notice this term, you all, near Sodom. So as we move forward in our journey here, the next time we see Lot, he's going to be in Sodom. But notice he said now, he just, hey, I'm just going to go near Sodom. Now verse 13. Now the men of Sodom were evil, sinning greatly against the Lord. So the men of Sodom were evil, sinning greatly against the Lord. A lot we're going to get, obviously, when we come to chapters 18 and 19, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it is, notice he said that they sinned greatly. So much like Noah, we're going to come to see that the men of Sodom and Gomorrah will be just as evil. One of the issues that we see is that it's not, and it won't be just homosexuality. They were evil continually. Okay, they were very prosperous people, but they were, so we'll get to that when we get. We're gonna come upon them when in chapters 18 and 19, because of course those two chapters will deal with God specifically coming down saying, I'm getting ready to destroy this city. And the only reason why probably that this city becomes pertinent is because what? Lot's living in it. Right? And that's what Abraham's thinking about. Abraham thinking, oh, wait a minute. Nephew's in there, right? Bad choices from nephew again. Well, it says, verse 14, after Lot had separated from him, the Lord said to Abraham. Now, interesting, God is now saying, okay, after he left, and I'm going to ad lib here. I'm going to just play a little fun with him. God probably, I never told you to bring him in the first place. He didn't say that. Of course, the Lord didn't say that. Let's read. After Lot separated from him, the Lord said to Abraham, look from the place where you are, look north and south, east and west, for I will give you and your offspring forever all the land that you see. Again, God, sovereign, God, right? God gives as he please. God does as he please. So just keep that in mind. There's no quarreling with God in this respect here. He says, I will make you, verse 16, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, then your offsprings could be counted. Get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. So Abraham moved his tent and went and lived near the oaks of Meron at Hebron, where he built an altar to God. So again, kind of interesting. The offering of sacrifices again is something that is not even it's not a law of Moses it will be incorporated in, but the kind of offering there, that's kind of interesting. Now, Abraham, when he talks about the dust, the promise to Abraham that his seed will be like the dust of the ground. Like, so just go on every beach, okay? Go on every beach, right? Go wherever there's sand is. And you see dust, right? The particles, right? And he's saying this is how your seed's going to be. Question becomes, when you look at the history of Israel, how did that work out? I mean, for example, at no time in Israel, that land that you see there right now is not like big. Like, think about this way, right? Like, you have other lands so that, like India, that has 1 billion people, China, 1 billion people. Israel itself, I think, is probably at best just big as one of our states. And I'm not even talking about Texas or anything like that, right? But just like a small state. So how will the numbers be so great? And one of the ways the numbers would be so great is you have to also think about through time. When God looks at something, like the age of the time that man's here on this earth, God looks at it from start to finish, from generations to generations. And when you spread it out and notice that I'm giving you this land forever, so then when you put that on there, okay, yeah, the seed of Abraham is going to multiply forever, never, 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 never. Then when you count, if you want to count also in there the seed of Abraham through Christ, that becomes even more. Okay, guys, chapter 14 in the next study. I will see you then.